Hello, everyone, and welcome to Global 360, the show produced by the Washington Diplomat, which for over 25 years has been the premier source of information for the diplomatic community here in Washington, D.C. I'm Anna Gawel, managing editor of the Diplomat, and I want to introduce my esteemed co-host, Eric Ham, political analyst. Eric. Hi, Eric.
Hey, Anna. Welcome back.
So it was quite a week last week, as I'm sure
you think?
I don't know, government funding.
That's an understatement.
Raising the debt ceiling, 1.2 trillion in infrastructure, 3.5 trillion in social spending and climate change. I think the Democrats might have just thrown in like solving world hunger while they were at it last week. So yes, it was. You can even probably hear I'm a little hoarse, just probably from talking too much about it, as I'm sure you have been doing all of last week as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So so apologize if I sound at some point, I'll be like a teenage boy kind of cracking up. I'm still dealing with a lot of hoarseness and coughing. It's not thankfully COVID, just so everybody knows. I feel like, I know. I feel like nowadays, anytime someone gets like the sniffles, it's almost like you have to preface it with, it's like that kindergarten cop movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's not a tumor. It's not COVID. I swear. Responsible PSA. I've gotten tested multiple times. I'm vaccinated. So, doing the right things. But now that you've got that PSA over with, I'll move on to my unsolicited opinions and advice.
No, we actively solicit your opinion.
I appreciate that.
Yes, we want to hear it. Yeah, that's what makes the fireworks go. Yeah, let's do it.
Poor Eric hears it all the time, and everyone else around me. Well, so I want to start with kind of a completely shameless plug. So in my free time, I have a Substack newsletter called Beltway Breakdown. And you're a nerd when this is what you do in your free time. You write thousands of words about politics.
No judgment zone.
No. But, as you know, whenever you start getting into political commentary, it's really easy, as I always say, to kind of put on the 2020 hindsight glasses. But I will say that, over the summer, I've been kind of right about one thing consistently, which is going back to the bipartisan infrastructure talks or framework. You'll hear the acronyms out there, BIF, BIF, what have you. I was really consistently annoyed when the media would portray those talks as dead every other week, only, for them to rise from the dead, like some kind of zombie apocalypse or what have you. I had always said throughout the summer that the core group, a sizable group of Republicans, and of course, Senate Democrats, they had not only invested so much effort and political capital, but so much good faith effort for that to go to waste. So I was not surprised one bit that it, successfully passed the Senate. Now, granted, the situation among Democrats now between the House and Senate is in many ways, a lot more complicated. But I think there are some similar dynamics at play here with when you're talking about the larger budget reconciliation, social spending package and the infrastructure package, which is that they're both, they're too big to fail. This party is going to rise and fall together. And so I don't view last week as a failure. I think it's kind of a natural step in this, very difficult governing process. I want to say what I did over, in August, I did kind of downplay the influence of House Democratic moderates. I think so did House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. I was surprised they kind of flexed their muscles and they got their, date on the vote. Supposedly it was going to be last week. But, Pelosi being Pelosi, she's shrewd enough to always leave herself wiggle room and not necessarily, she was not going to put something up that didn't have the votes. I also think, that they gamed out a whole bunch of different backup scenarios. I think one that people didn't touch upon was if enough progressives had voted for the infrastructure bill, but you still had enough, defectors that it wasn't enough to pass. I think we all also have to remember that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has whipped his caucus not to vote for infrastructure. And so in a sense, if the vote had come up and it had failed, what that would have done is shown, especially Joe Manchin in the Senate, that, hey, Republicans in the House aren't negotiating in good faith. And if anything, that might have pushed him and Kirsten Sinema closer to the reconciliation camp. So I think there were a lot of scenarios last week where it wasn't going to be a failure. I also will say this about progressives, and certainly when it comes out to victory, you've got progressives. I've criticized them over the summer for, in many ways, this kind of zero-sum mentality when it comes to politics and aversion to compromise. I don't think that doing this constant public criticism of Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema is really, constructive. You have the hard reality, whether you love him or hate him. Joe Manchin is a Democratic senator representing West Virginia, which is quintessential Trump country, in a 50-50 Senate. Nothing's going to be done without his vote. So I don't think alienating him is necessarily a wise strategy. That being said, I think progressives were 100% in the right of using their leverage to block a vote on the bipartisan infrastructure talks, because they would have lost all leverage when it comes to the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill that has most of their progressive priorities in terms of social spending and climate change. I think if the infrastructure bill had passed, Joe Manchin would have pocketed that as a win. Here you go, I got your roads and highways. But I think Republicans would have portrayed it as a loss for the Democrats. I think they would have gone home to their districts, said, hey, I forced this bipartisan compromise. I got you roads, highways, bridges. And at the same time, I blocked Democrats from enacting this deficit busting socialist agenda. So I don't think passing infrastructure would have been the victory that a lot of moderate Democrats think it would have, because reconciliation would have been endangered. So I think even though there are these kind of huge schisms in the party over obviously climate change, Medicare, prescription drug pricing, whether to tax, specific taxes on corporations and the wealthy, I think we are back in a sense to where we started over the summer, except now we have more time to actually put reconciliation into a real framework. I think things fundamentally haven't shifted. If anything, there's been a positive movement where you have the Congressional Progressive Caucus saying that they are willing to budge on the reconciliation number. That is huge, because that hasn't happened all summer long. That is progress. I mean, I think we're going to get into a debate of how to do it. I think the smart way is to kind of tinker with the duration of programs. I think that's something we might see to lower the cost. And I think that really wouldn't dilute the programs as much as people say, because once, you know how it is, once you enact popular programs, Republicans are going to be hard pressed politically to take those away from voters. So I think there's definitely that route there. I think nothing that has happened should surprise anyone. Joe Manchin for months has said his figure is 1.5 trillion to 2 trillion. In this recent, framework that got leaked, he hewed closer to the 1.5 trillion amount. But before, President Biden has seemed to be okay with $2 trillion for the reconciliation bill. He reiterated that on Friday. He's adjusted it today, I think, to 1.9 to 2.3 trillion. But I think, I've said all summer long, we're going to probably be in the ballpark of 1.8 to 1.9 trillion dollars. And that's a huge victory. I mean, we were just talking about this before. This progressive bill will impact almost every single American from cradle to grave. We're talking, childcare, elderly care, universal pre-K, universal community college, healthcare. I mean, it is transformative, real dent in climate change. On top of $1.9 trillion in COVID relief and, very helpful packages that were contained in that, and $1.2 trillion in much needed infrastructure. I mean, this would be a tremendous win for progressives. And I think same thing for moderates. I mean, you could have Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema would go home. They then could really declare victory. They say, hey, I not only got you $1.2 trillion in infrastructure jobs, I also got you really, especially for West Virginia, social spending, programs that the state desperately needs. But I managed to get the Democrats to go down from initial figure of 6 trillion down to 1.8. I mean, that's a victory for Manchin and the moderates as well. So I just personally think that, I would not characterize last week as a failure at all. And I think a lot of commentators are shifting to that as well. I will say my last thing, kind of the caveat, I think as successful, even if this dual build back better agenda of President Biden's succeeds, I don't think that necessarily guarantees that Democrats will win the House. They have history working against them, a very narrow majority redistricting that favors the GOP. I think, though, even the prospect of losing the House should actually motivate some Democrats to vote for this dual package, because this is not, they should put their self-interests aside. This is your chance to make a real legacy, to leave a real mark on your party, your constituents, and your country. I don't doubt that Joe Manchin has a genuine concern about, deficits and spending. But, at the end of the day, if he were to put his own electoral self-interest above this, I mean, I think that would be profoundly, horrible. And I don't see that in his character. I think, you, again, rise and fall as one party. Kirsten Sinema has said she wants to be in the vein of John McCain. John McCain was always guided by what was best for the country. And I think President Biden, again, has not gotten enough credit, where he's very shrewd from the get-go. He always knew these packages would have to be tied together in order to pass. I mean, he let that slip weeks ago. We know that's what has to happen. Again, they're going to sink or swim together. Sometimes Democrats can be this party of sacrifice. We saw this with Obamacare. They got pummeled in the short term, but in the long term, it's what's best was best for the country. Imagine we're going through a pandemic, tens of millions of Americans that didn't have insurance thanks to Obamacare. So I think short term, they might get grief for this. Long term, it's what's best for the country. It will be a victory. Long diatribe. Short, I give the odds of this succeeding by the end of the year well over 50%. And then if I'm wrong, I can say, well, I thought 40% they'd lose.
No, this is actually going to pass, and it was always going to pass. But what people are having a hard time grasping and comprehending is we are, for the first time, seeing government actually work, and we're seeing how the sausage gets made. And unfortunately, we have a media infrastructure that is set up for the last 4 years, where it was fights, it was bomb throwing. But what you're seeing take place right now are actual negotiations to go big and address many of the long-held intractable problems that have been facing the United States for decades. We have known for years that the United States needed money and infrastructure. In fact, for 4 years under President Trump, we had Infrastructure Week. President Trump wanted to see something on infrastructure, but he was never able to get it done because it's hard. The last time we saw
he didn't really bother. I mean, other than like the photo ops.
He did not, because it is hard. As we see right now with Democrats who control the White House, the Senate, and the House, it is still very difficult to move all of these moving parts in unison in one place to get to one common goal. It's very difficult. As you mentioned with Obamacare, that's the last time we saw a government actually work on something that was really hard. And also, as you mentioned, people at the time didn't like it, but now once you start giving people something, it's hard, nearly impossible to take it away. And so you're right. So I think there's a lot that they can work with here. That number, you're right, is going to come down. Already, Speaker Pelosi has already floated a $2.1 trillion package. We've already heard President Biden say that 1.5 is out. So clearly, this number is going to be closer to 2 trillion than it is to 1.5. And then you can start messing around. Well, I shouldn't say mess around, but then you can start actually trying to work the numbers to your benefit. And what I mean by that is you can work on the top line years in order to bring it down. So instead of going 10 years, you can go 7 or 6. Or what you can do is you can include programs for 3 years, 4 years, But as you said, once you start giving, imagine you start giving people a child tax credit for childcare. You're not going to be able to take that away once you start giving that to them.
You do so at your own political peril.
Exactly. Imagine you negotiate down prescription drug prices. Who's going to now say, okay, well, you know what? People have gotten the benefit for prescription drugs for far too long. We've got to get rid of this. That's not going to happen. So I think what we see here, and here's what's interesting. Progressives have actually been the ones that have held the line on Biden's vision and on Biden's plan. And so I think they are the ones that are seen as the ones that are operating moderately, more so than what we're seeing from Sinema and Manchin right now. And I think you're being, I think too diplomatic of Manchin and Sinema on this.
Of that, Eric.
Yeah, I think you are. I think we need to be realist about what's going on with both of them, and just come out and say it. These are two people who are protecting their special interests. And I think we have to look at Sinema, and this is my take on Sinema. Kristen Sinema is someone who started out as a member of the Green Party, eventually became a Democrat. She was a state legislator. She was a congresswoman who ran for the US Senate. And what we have to recognize, when you run for Senate, the stakes get higher. It costs far more money to run for a US Senate seat than a House seat. So she probably went from a safe Arizona House seat that probably cost her around $5 million to be able to compete. Because she was an incumbent, she probably needed even less than that. Now she's running for an open US Senate seat in a state that is trending purple, which means it's far more competitive, which means she needs to cast a wider net for those corporate special interests to be able to fund her campaign. So she's done that. And that race probably cost her upwards of 20 million, maybe even more. So now she's got to deliver on what it is that she got from them. And Big Pharma is, I think, one of those big interests that she has to adhere to. And so they don't. And so when we're talking about a bill that's going to negotiate down the price of prescription drugs, I think she's holding the line on that. And so I think right now, Kristen Sinema is in a space right now where she's trying to manage what it is that she needs to provide for those in order to keep the money coming in so she can be competitive in Arizona versus what this bill is calling for her to do. And so I think right now, because she's a freshman US Senator, now she's representing the entire state, not just a small slither of the state. I think a lot of that is coming to a head. And I think right now we're seeing someone who is grappling with which direction she's supposed to go in, because we have heard what Joe Manchin's bottom line number is. We still don't know what it is for Kristen Sinema. So they may get to $2 trillion, and we don't know if that's going to be good enough for her, because no one has heard from her. And look, I'm at the White House every day, and I've had to get a new pair of track shoes because I'm literally running from the White House to Capitol Hill every single day. And I can tell you from my sources, we have no idea what's going on with Kristen Sinema. I have not been able to talk to anyone in her office. I have not been able to talk to her. I haven't been able to get a readout from the White House on what they're getting from Sinema on any of this. Right now, Sinema is literally AWOL.
Yeah, and I have to say now, did you see, I caught it on YouTube, did you see the SNL sketch of the Democrat? So if you haven't seen it, folks, Cicely Strong is the actress who portrays Kristen Sinema. And when Biden asks her, what would you like? Yellow starbursts. I like the film Polar Express. I like chaos. It is classic. But on that note, I wrote down the actress's name. She's also so good on SNL. I have to find it. But she portrayed, the Cicely Strong's cinema portrayal got a lot of headlines, but I thought the one with Joe Manchin was just as strong. And I think actually this is a good segue into it. So she was, oh gosh, I have to find her name, but she's a really underrated character on SNL. But anyway, So when I asked Manchin, and we talked about this, we were talking about this before we went on air, of, in terms of special interests, I think we know what Joe Manchin's are. There's some pharmaceutical, but we've got coal. If anything is going to be the sticking point in these negotiations over reconciliation, it will obviously be the climate change initiatives, and it will be the drug pricing. I mean, we're already seeing these Mediscare commercials that Republicans are doing, throwing everything to terrify people that, again, Democrats are going to take your Medicare. I don't think Democrats are coming back as forcefully of, hey, no, we're going to give you, as an elderly person, senior citizen, you're actually going to be able to go to the dentist because of us. You're actually going to be able to get a hearing aid and glasses because of us. So these are the people who vote consistently and reliably. Again, big pharma is already coming out there, and how much that will influence Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin is really going to be, I think, the big question. Like you were saying, more so than these numbers that we're really fixated on. And I just remember, so going back to the SNL sketch, the actress was, we have to keep going with coal. We have to keep going with coal. But now, since we got a lot of the big pieces, we got to get the small pieces out. So we need kids in those mines with their tiny hands getting the tiny pieces of coal. So I was cracking up. But, it does bring me to kind of a point where there was a good article, I forget where I read, where Joe Manchin does have a point of saying, all these climate change initiatives are often good on paper, but very difficult to implement. And I think he has a point in his state where you're not going to tell a 55-year-old person who's been working in the coal mines for all of their life, oh, by the way, here's how you install solar panels. It's a lot more difficult than that. So on that front, I think he has a point. Now, on the second point, going back to SNL, what about that coal miner's son or daughter? I mean, coal is still the main fossil fuel, but it will not be. That's not going to be where the jobs are, period. So, ultimately the question I think will be, will Manchin rise above his own self-interest, his own special interests, which are energy, and you can get more into it in pharmaceuticals, or will he ultimately do what is best long-term for his constituents? And that's what this package is about. Long-term help for poor and, above all, more working middle class families. So I know you have a few words on Joe Manchin that we were talking about. What are your SNL thoughts?
I think the short answer is no, he's not. And the reason for that is because we know Joe Manchin created an energy co-op back in 1988. His son is running it now. He's got $5 million in stock options invested in that. He's paid $500,000 in dividends from that company. Joe Manchin is one of the most leveraged on energy in Congress right now. In addition to that, he's the chair of the Senate Energy and Commerce Committee. So he's literally able to get anything energy related that benefits coal and benefits his own bottom line out of that committee. Nothing is going to come through without him. And so I think the answer to that is no. And the reason is because this $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, it expedites the death of coal. And so basically what you're saying is, and what Joe Manchin would have to be doing is basically saying, I am basically now signing a death knell to my own individual wealth. Who is actually going to do that? Joe Manchin certainly is not going to do that. Even though this is a phased approach, it's still expediting that. And when you look at where companies are right now, if you look at Ford Motor Company, that actually just recently announced an $11 billion investment in electric vehicles and also in building the batteries to power those vehicles. I mean, we are seeing the market forces are actually showing us where we are. And I think what you're saying is government is actually attempting to catch up with where the market is right now. And so I think coal is a dying industry right now. But I think Manchin at 74 years old recognizes that he's going to continue to ride this out, because at the same time, it has been generational for him, for his family. And so I think he's always been, I think, one of those who has been very diplomatic about let's delay this. And what he means by delay this is let's kill this, because it's going to impact both him personally as well as that of his family and those around him.
So what do you think will come out on top at the end of the day? Do you think Manchin will, I mean, we know the question of drug pricing and Medicare is going to be huge in these talks. I mean, Big Pharma is going to attack and attack and attack. And it's going to be really hard for Democrats to hold the line on these, you know, false, in many ways, false attack ads. It's not like, you know, Big Pharma is going to go bankrupt all of a sudden, you know, because of these changes. This is what America needs. But do you think ultimately when it comes to the climate change issues will, I think, be an even more of a thornier debate? What do you think Manchin will ultimately cave to his self-interest or rise above them when it comes to passing reconciliation?
I think we've already seen Manchin agree. I mean, he's already agreed on a number. So, and that's why I say we're going to get something, and whatever they get, it's going to be huge, because we're talking about something that has not been addressed. And I think you're seeing a radical shift in the social safety net, something that hasn't been done since in at least half a century. So he's already put a number out of 1.5 trillion. And the fact that he's already put a number on the table, that in and of itself is a win. So right now, we're just trying to figure out what that final number is. But we know already 1.5. Now, President Biden has said we can't go 1.5. You know, so the numbers that are being thrown around now is around 2 trillion. But I think there's going to be a number, and I think that's going to embolden Manchin, because again, we're talking about one of the poorest states in the union, in West Virginia, and everything that is in this bill is going to be tremendous for his constituents. Because when you talk about that 55-year-old that has been working in that coal plant for the last 30, 40 years, that 55-year-old is going to need those lower prescription drug prices when he's dealing with black lung disease in his 60s and 70s. So it's going to be a benefit for all of his constituents. And also, when you talk about a state that's so poor, and you look at the child tax credit, and you look at the universal pre-K, and the ability to go to community college, you're right. That 55-year-old, when you're looking at his children, I mean, it's so much in there. And I think that's why we're seeing Joe Manchin, you know, who has made every effort to try to kill this bill. But now even he's coming around saying, okay, I can go 1.5 trillion. That is a huge, huge win. I think what you're seeing now are progressives trying to see if they can get just a little bit more, recognizing the most we're going to get out of this is 2 trillion. So now I think what we're seeing is a negotiation over years and about $500 billion, but still walking away with a major hardcore infrastructure bill that will provide roads and bridges, in addition to a massive social safety net for all Americans. That's something that Democrats can run on. But we also have to be clear on the politics of this. No matter what happens, even if this was a $3.5 trillion package, this is not going to have any bearing whatsoever on the midterm elections in 2022. It just isn't. Because one, politics is a lifetime. Two, the dynamics at play in 2022 are very different than 20 years ago. And three, because we're in such a polarized environment right now, legislation just doesn't even matter. So this is something that Democrats need to be looking at, as you already said, Anna, in terms of what is the legacy and what kind of country will they be leaving for the American people? Yeah. But to look at this from a naked political standpoint does no one any good, because the dynamics are completely different.
Exactly. And you know, we kept talking, we were supposed to disagree on this episode, but we're on the same page as always. I mean, it's true. You know, let's go back to the 55-year-old coal miner here. You know, he could get all of these benefits. His kid could go to community college, but he's a Trumper, and he's not going to give the Democrats credit for any of that. And if anything, he'll be like, well, Trump did it. And we'll be in this alternate reality. And that's really just the way it is. So you have to do what is right And it will, I think, pay dividends in the long term. We have to have one party that is tangibly doing something and not simply obstructing.
And I think that's what you're saying here.
Yes. We're seeing the normal aspects of government working. Yes, tempers need to cool down between moderates and progressives, but I do think it's gotten to this point. It's too big to fail. That's a very shrewd way that the administration did it. They didn't negotiate in public. They didn't, I think that was very smart of them. We are still, in this thing is very much alive. And well, I want to, before you go, because I know you got to put your track shoes on and run off to the White House, but I want to kind of talk about the other elephant in the room before we get October 30th is when the Democrats have extended the highway funding bill. So that's kind of like our new deadline. And there's always drop dead deadlines. Believe me, they can be pushed. But I think that's the one we're looking at now for infrastructure. But before that, we're looking at October 18th for, of course, raising the debt ceiling. And, speaking of obstructionism, this is a classic example. I will say I was a bit surprised by how quickly Democrats caved and didn't hold Republicans' feet to the fire in terms of raising the debt ceiling and funding the government. But I think they saw the writing on the wall that politically, no matter what, they would have been blamed for it. It happened on their watch. I mean, at the end of the day, they have right on their side. I mean, the GOP is, completely being hypocritical. We're raising the debt ceiling to pay for the Trump administration's $8 trillion worth of debt that they racked up. Like,
exactly,
we're doing it to help you here, buddies. It's, hey, we as Democrats quietly did it for you 3 times during the Trump administration for your corporate tax cuts that have not been paid for. So of course they're morally here in the right, but the optics don't matter. Before, I'm sure you can kind of get into your kind of thinking of what the Democrats might do. And for those that don't know, Punchbowl today reported that the Senate parliamentarians said that Democrats can raise the debt ceiling through basically a majority vote, and it won't endanger their separate reconciliation package. So that has alleviated some concerns on the Democrats' part. Problem with raising the debt ceiling is they would likely have to raise it, not suspend it. They would have to raise it by a fixed number. And then what's going to happen. Republicans will go back and use that number to hammer them home. Hey, you added $2 trillion worth to the debt when that $2 trillion was meant to pay for those corporate tax cuts from 2017. So we all know the game. And I think no one knows the game better here than Mitch McConnell. I want to say a few words before I put it back over to you about Mitch McConnell. He was very shrewd, Machiavellian here of winning this stare down with Democrats over the debt ceiling. What I think is interesting is obviously it's safe to say Mitch McConnell is not the biggest fan of former President Donald Trump. I think it's pretty safe to say he views them as a threat to democracy. I mean, he was there when the insurrectionists were trying to overthrow a legitimate election. So, but I wonder if in the long term, Mitch McConnell is not more of a threat to democracy than Donald Trump ever was. I say this because of 2 big things. One, the debt ceiling. Every time somebody does this, they create a precedent. You've created a precedent where you are threatening to crash global markets because we're saying America cannot pay its bills because we just won't do a simple vote. That's not going to go away. The only time somebody has messed with the concept of a default, again, has been Republicans back in 2011. They were willing to, and we took, a credit downgrade because of this. That's one precedent that's incredibly dangerous, to use a debt default as just, hey, it's a regular, piece of political blackmail. That's not unprecedented, and that will not go away now that he has set that precedent. And I think we've seen this also, obviously, with the Supreme Court, following McConnell's tortured logic of why Merrick Garland wouldn't get a vote as a potential Supreme Court justice because, Obama had 10 months left in office. But then with days left for Trump, Amy Coney Barrett gets confirmed. Following McConnell's tortured logic about this, has, the result has been you have a Supreme Court with a 9-3 conservative majority that's been institutionalized and that nowhere remotely represents the ideological breakdown of this country. It is so ideologically lopsided. He has institutionalized that, and it's going to have real effects in the midterms, namely abortion and Roe versus Wade and so many other things. So, and of course we're at reconciliation because McConnell institutionalized the filibuster. And you had to find a way to get around that so you could actually pass stuff, So when I look at the debt fight, I think of Mitch McConnell, and for somebody who has touted himself as somebody who cherishes and upholds the rules of the Senate, he's been the ultimate rule breaker, in my opinion.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell is going to go down as perhaps, if not certainly the worst, I think, majority leader of the Senate, but he's also going to go down as one of the biggest roadblocks to democracy in this country. In addition to that, when you look at the debt fights that are taking place right now, Democrats should have known when they took control of both the House and the Senate, they weren't going to get any help from Republicans on anything. We have seen through 8 years of Obama that Republicans were willing and would actually shoot the hostage. And we saw that with the debt fight in 2011. So that's something that they should be aware of. In fact, I just would have assumed that that Chuck Schumer would have been prepared to go the reconciliation route to raise the debt ceiling. And here's the thing about the debt ceiling. That's an argument that just doesn't hold water politically, because most Americans don't know what the debt ceiling is and they don't really care about it. They would only care about the debt ceiling if, in fact, we didn't raise it and then the catastrophic events would take place. And that's when people would realize, oh, crap, this is a really bad thing.
That's my 401k.
Exactly.
Damage.
So they can use that as an argument to try to say Democrats are spending blah, 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 blah. But it's not going to work, because if Americans are recognizing that they've already got a COVID relief package, they've already now got this child tax credit, and they're getting lower prescription drug prices, they don't care what is happening, because they recognize that now I'm getting things that are actually beneficial to my life. So that's an argument that that Republicans can try. I just don't think it really goes far, and it doesn't mean anything. And also, when you look at where and who the audiences are that they're going to be talking to, let's take Mitch McConnell's own district, Kentucky. Kentucky, again, like West Virginia, is one of the poorest states in the country. So everything.
But keep reelecting Mitch McConnell.
Right. And also he has one of the lowest approval ratings of any senator as well. So the fact that this bill, this debt, saying that, oh, they've done this and they've raised and they've created all of this debt, actually, I don't think it holds water, and it's not an effective argument politically, because again, most Americans simply don't understand it. And so Democrats should not even see that as a threat. They should simply ignore it, because Americans don't get it and they don't understand it, and they don't know what the debt ceiling fight is. In fact, what Democrats should do, if they're savvy enough, but you've got people like Manchin and Sinema who won't do it, they need to just do away with the debt ceiling altogether. They need to just actually change the filibuster, lower the threshold on filibuster, and then just take a vote to just eliminate it, and just eliminate it on a party line vote.
Yeah, which unfortunately you and I both know will not happen, because that will require 60 votes. And once again, we've come full circle to where there's no way you're going to get 10 Republican votes on anything. Although you did get a sizable number of Republican votes for the infrastructure package. And I, again, think that lends itself to this larger narrative that we do not want to let these really once in a generation efforts go to waste. I do think every Democrat is at least aware of that, or you would hope so. I think I read it in the Punchbowl News where, it takes time to enact an FDR agenda without FDR majorities. And that's the situation.
That's a really good point. And also we have to keep in mind that Mitch McConnell actually supports that $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan.
Yes.
He voted for it. So clearly we see that's something that's a good thing, that if you can actually get Mitch McConnell to go along with something that Democrats supported, that's
Yep.
amazing. And that, hey, hell is freezing over
I
right
was
now.
just
The
about
fact
to
that,
say this.
yeah.
Well, you know we're good when we're ending on the same analogy. We're that in sync. So, well, Eric, I'm gonna let you run off to the White House. I'm gonna run off and grab some coffee and some NyQuil or something to knock out this head cold.
Knock
It's
out the
not
COVID.
COVID. Thankfully. You can tell that to people, but they're like, okay, yeah, sure. Anyway, but well, anyway, again, thank you everyone for joining us. As always, we will be on top of all of the fights. We knew that last week was not going to be the end all be all, and we know that the debt limit in 2 weeks is not going to be the end all be all. So we've got a lot more to talk about. Please join our listserv, or you could just check out our whatchamacallit, website. I'm gonna blame my blanking out on the head cold. Our website, watchdiplomat.com. You can also sign up, so that way you will get invites to all of our next discussions and anything else that the Washington Diplomat is hosting. So please do that. Everyone, please stay healthy, stay sane. Eric, running around.
I'm trying.
We're all trying. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Thanks, everybody.